Governor Hughes, Mrs. Hughes, Secretary DeFrancis, Secretary Corbally, members of the governor's staff, members of the council, guests, and friends. On behalf of the trustees of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs, and on behalf of the Maryland Port Authority's World Trade Center Institute, we'd like to thank you for coming this evening. We're timing this program, of course, to coincide with International Trade Week in appreciation of the support of our good friends at the Department of Commerce. During the next year, the Council will sponsor 6 to 10 programs, which are international business and international trade oriented. And several of those we'll do in cooperation with the Maryland Port Authority. We'd like to especially thank this evening the International Division of Union Trust Bank for the reception. And I'd like to remind you that our next 2 guests will be, first of all, Morris Draper, who of course was the President's special emissary to the Middle East in 1982 and 83, who will speak on U.S. Middle Eastern policy. And that's on the 23rd of May. And on the 6th of June, our guest will be Ambassador Gillespie, who presently is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Caribbean and Central America. And he'll be talking on U.S. policy toward the Caribbean Basin and Central America. He was also, incidentally, the American ambassador to Grenada in early part of this year. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you, in order to introduce the governor, the Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees, a journalist who is known to nearly all of you, Mr. Bradford Jacobs.
It's an honor, I'm told, to introduce a governor. And it is an honor. But in this case, it's also absurd and frankly presumptuous to stand up here and introduce the governor of Maryland to the citizens of Maryland. It's like introducing Adam to Eve, or ham to eggs, or introducing Dale Hess to Marvin Mandel. But this is no exquisite emissary from outer Mongolia. This is the man that you and I helped elect in 1978 by a record-breaking majority, re-elected in 1982 with not a glove laid on him. This is your old cousin Harry from across the bay. And your old cousin Pat from across the bay in Denton. So I thought I won't insult your intelligence by telling you all the things I know about Harry Hughes. I won't tell you how he broke by his election the criminal ring that's been running this state for the previous 9 years. I won't tell you about the really brave effort, struggle he made to reform one of the most difficult, politically difficult operations in the state, namely the state prison system. Prisoners, you know, have no constituents. I won't even bother you with his latest brave non-political effort, which is to rescue the Chesapeake Bay right out there. Rescue it from you and me, to be sure, but rescue it. So I just don't see any sense in telling you things that you either know or should know. What I would like to do is focus for a second your attention on the title of his address, Maryland's International Economic Policy. A little Ruritanian, perhaps, but not really. Not really. The point is, this is what's happening. If you look around you, or rather look around the world, or look around the stadium, the banking world finds that state barriers are melting industrially, and in the manufacturing world, national boundaries are evaporating, certainly in Western Europe, certainly in Southeast Asia. In the military world, God bless them, oceans are evaporating. So what's happening is that whole peoples, instead of bashing their heads together in conflict, are now beginning slowly to put their heads together to figure out what we can all do most effectively, what we can make best, most efficiently, and where and how. That's what's happening now. It's not that Maryland is expanding. It's that the world is shrinking. And this is not just a sweeping generality. In Maryland right now, there are something close to 140 foreign-owned firms operating today. Let me just read you by political subdivision, how they're divided. Baltimore City has 33. Baltimore County has 23. Howard has 38. Anne Arundel has 17. Montgomery has 25. The Japanese alone have 27 companies in Maryland. That's 1,600 employees, mostly Marylanders. That's a $30 million payroll. Now, Maryland isn't just sitting around scratching its head over this. Maryland's out there scrabbling with the other states. Maryland has got offices in Asia, offices in Europe. It has a governor who has personally gone to Asia, personally gone to Europe in several instances to gather this up. I would venture a small personal prediction that among the many ornaments of the Harry Hughes administration, one of the leading ones is going to be the fact, it's not altogether clear now, but that he has established Maryland on the world scene. Governor, the floor is yours. And the ceiling too, if you like.
That's the first time I've ever been introduced by a journalist. And I sort of liked it. But you didn't have to make a speech, Brad. I'm the one that you gotta tear half mine up now.
The good part.
Going back to writing. I come to you at a rather busy time. You know, we're reviewing legislation, over 900 pieces of legislation passed during the 90-day session of the General Assembly. I think I'm correct in saying that over 700 of those passed in the last 3 weeks. So we really do scrutinize them as things get through. And we signed the bills yesterday, 206 of them. And you may have heard of one very significant piece of legislation that we signed, which was a bill declaring the state fossil. You know, we have a state butterfly, we have a state dog, we have a state sport. We now have a state fossil. That's it, right there. Et fora quadricostata. What it is, it's a marine snail that was first found in St. Mary's County in 1685. And it's 4-ribbed snail. It's not 1 or 2 ribs. It's a short ribs. It's 4 ribs. And it's the first fossil known or found in North America. So it is now the state fossil. And I thought you would like to know that. I think every state ought to honor one of its old fossils. That's the truth. And, speaking of the truth, you know, we're celebrating a lot of things this year. The 350th birthday of our state, the 200th anniversary of the ratification of the Treaty of Paris, 200th anniversary of George Washington's surrendering his commission in Annapolis, and also Harry Truman's 100th birthday. One of my favorite presidents. Might even be my favorite president. Certainly one of my favorite presidents. And speaking of the truth, you may have heard the story of Harry Truman told about the fellow that was running for office in Missouri, and I think he was running for Congress in two of the most populated areas of his district were St. Louis and Hannibal, Missouri. And it's been a hard-fought campaign, and shortly before the election, the campaign manager said to him, "You've got to get to St. Louis. That's our biggest city, and they're telling lies about you down there." The candidate said, "No, I can't go there. I've got to go to Hannibal." The campaign manager says, "You don't understand. You know, this is a close race. You've got a couple of days left. You've got to get to St. Louis. They're telling lies about you there." The candidate said, "You don't understand. I've got to go to Hannibal. They're telling the truth about me there." I was sitting there with Brad and thumbing through the pages here and making sure that they were all in proper order, because I told him about 4 years ago I gave a speech from a prepared text to a graduating class, and as I was delivering it, I turned the page and I went from page 6 to page 5. And nobody noticed it. That's true. Obviously not a very smart graduating class. I won't tell you where it was. And I won't even tell you the story about the speechwriter for the governor. You all heard that story about the speechwriter? You haven't heard that story, okay? I'm never going to get to this if it's possible. This governor was having trouble with his speechwriter because he would always hand him the speech as he walked into the hall to deliver it. So he called him in one day and dressed him up one side and down the other and said, "This has got to stop. I want my speech at least 10 days in advance because I want to go over it, edit it, make whatever changes." And he really dressed the speechwriter up and down, who left with his tail between his legs and somewhat angry, obviously. So sure enough, about 2 weeks later, the governor's giving a major speech, a really major speech, in the biggest city in the state. As he gets out of the car to go in the hall, he's handed his speech. And so he starts delivering this prepared text, and he is describing the 6 most critical problems in his state, the major problems that his state was facing. He went through all 6 of them. And then he said, "Here are my solutions to our 6 most critical problems." He turned the page, and all it says was, "You're on your own, you SOB." That's another reason why I checked. I could go on, I got a couple more, but I think I better get down to what I'm here about. Working with the complexity and issues of international trade is an area of business which offers today's executive really the greatest challenge. Many aspects of our daily lives are regularly touched by some facet of the international trade process. For example, a foreign car, say it is made in Sweden, is rolling on French tires, powered by gasoline from a Dutch oil company. The driver is headed to the airport where his US-built jetliner will take him to Germany for a business meeting, and I imagine they serve scotch from England on the airliner. The jetliner is made of aluminum from Guyana, strengthened with titanium and cobalt and chrome from South America, Africa, and Asia. The newspaper the executive read this morning is owned by an Australian. Did you hear that joke? And printed on Canadian newsprint. This could go on and on, but the main point is that the world has become smaller and smaller in terms of communication, in terms of travel, in terms of trade. For me, this process was clearly emphasized last week when I spoke at the dedication ceremonies for CGR Medical Corporation's new 75,000 square foot headquarters facility in Columbia. CGR is an international leader in the medical imaging field with over 6,000 employees in 93 countries. Its parent organization, Thomson, is one of the world's largest electronics companies with 121,000 employees worldwide and 1983 earnings of $7 billion. Who would have thought 20 years ago that a company of CGR's size would move to then rural Howard County, now one of the fastest growing areas in the nation? Actually, who would have thought 20 years ago that we would have the tremendous number of French firms, German firms, Japanese firms, other foreign firms locating establishments in this country to the extent that they're doing. I don't think anyone would. Traditionally, Americans have never been as aggressive as their overseas counterparts in exporting, simply because we have such a large, diverse market here in the United States. The rationale was simple. Why extend yourself when you can make a profit by staying at home? Well, a lot of European and Asian governments are very grateful that many American business people have adopted that attitude. It simply lets them get a foothold and become established in other markets without having to worry about competition from the U.S. The major industrial nations, except for the U.S., generally cover the cost of the goods they import by their exports. In that group of countries, exports and imports account for about 20% of the gross national product. In 1983, American exports, on the other hand, were only 6% of the GNP, while the ratio of imports to GNP stood at 7.8%. That difference between exports and imports, as you know, is a trade deficit, and it amounted to $57.5 billion last year, and it's even larger, as I understand it, this year. A strong dollar is desirable, but paradoxically, its very strength makes U.S. products less attractive overseas, while at the same time making foreign goods more attractive here. Market forces, operating as they do, result in a greater demand for less expensive imports, while slowing overseas demands for more expensive U.S. goods. Obviously, all of this contributes to a larger balance of trade deficit. The deficit helps to fuel the continuing debate over free trade versus protectionism for American industry. In viewing this debate, I'm reminded of a recent statement by political columnist George Will, who commented, "Free trade is like Christianity. More believe in it than practice it." His point, and that can be said about a lot of things, as a matter of fact, his point illustrates that the federal government is preaching a free trade sermon, but its domestic policies, the massive and potentially crippling deficits, make it difficult for U.S. firms to compete in foreign markets. Some 54,000 Marylanders depend on international trade for their jobs. This represents, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, 3%, just 3% of all jobs in Maryland, which is about 1/2 of the national average. Before 1979, Maryland had not entered into any formal type of culture and economic relationships in any foreign areas. Something significant about 1979. So after I assumed office, I focused on the necessity of entering into the international marketplace. I emphasized the importance of beginning sister state relationships both in the European and Asian theaters. In June 1980, as a result of my visit to Anhui Province in the People's Republic of China, an economic and cultural agreement was executed between that area and the state of Maryland. Some people are here tonight who were with us on that trip. This was followed in April 1981 with a sister state relationship developed with Kanagawa Prefecture in Japan, and in May 1981 with a similar agreement with the region Nord-Pas-de-Calais in France. The signing of these sister state agreements was a culmination of many exchanges between Maryland and the governmental and business leaders from these areas. Those efforts have served as a learning experience for us as to the commercial and cultural environments of those areas. They were the first phase in a planned and deliberate process of securing a position for Maryland in the world marketplace. It was, if you will, an undertaking in concert with the old Chinese proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This was our first step in a relationship with foreign governments. It is interesting to note that at the time, our contact in China at that time was Mr. Wan Li, who was governor of the province of Anhui. Today, he occupies a senior position in the national government. Our initial contact in region of Pas-de-Calais, Pierre Mauroy, now serves as Prime Minister of France. Now, there is something interesting about that. A few weeks before I went to China, Wan Li was promoted from the governorship of Anhui province to a vice premier of China and moved to Peking. And that was the position he held when Li arrived there. Just a few days before I arrived in France, Pierre Mauroy was promoted from mayor of Lille to the prime minister of France. And ever since, I've been getting invitations from officials all over the world. In 5 years, the state's principal agency for promoting exports and reverse investments, the Department of Economic and Community Development, and I'm glad to say that Frank DeFrancis is now secretary of that department. I'm very fortunate in that. That department has seen a 5-fold increase in its budget to attract foreign firms to Maryland, from $144,000 in 1979 to $700,000 for the coming fiscal year. This has been an extremely good investment because since 1980, and Brad's given you some of these figures, either directly or indirectly through state efforts, 45 foreign companies have located or expanded in Maryland. They've committed a total capital investment of $85.1 million and provided 1,800 new jobs for Marylanders since 1980. The state has conducted 20 foreign missions, 6 in Europe, 6 in Japan, 8 in Canada, to lure foreign firms here to Maryland. In the 20 years prior to 1979, the state had conducted only 2 overseas economic development missions. Today, we are averaging 55 visits a year from foreign companies to inspect Maryland as a potential for establishing facilities here. This effort is further enhanced by the establishment of foreign trade zones in Prince George's County, Baltimore City, and at BWI Airport. There are also 8 enterprise zones around the state for both foreign and domestic industry. Maryland is one of the leaders, as a matter of fact, in establishing this system in the nation. Today, I mean literally today, DECD's computer will be linked up to the Department of Commerce Trade Opportunities database. And the advantages of this are multifold. First, it will allow the Maryland business community to become immediately aware of overseas trade opportunities as they develop. Second, through the use of the computer, DECD will further be able to match potential overseas customers with Maryland suppliers by maintaining a complete computer file on Maryland manufacturers and their products. And third, using the word processor, will list the management capabilities of the system. We will even be able to mail personalized letters to potential Maryland suppliers and overseas customers, informing each of the mutual trade opportunities available to them. The potential for this system is obvious. The automation process makes the availability of opportunities considerably more timely compared to the older manual system. And in a business where time is money, this competitive advantage on the competition could make a vast difference in the bottom line. In the future, we hope to be able to expand this pilot project so it can track exports coming through the Port of Baltimore and BWI Airport and their potential destinations. This information should be extremely useful in uncovering new market opportunities for Maryland firms. In 1983, along with the House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Tyrus Athey, I successfully sponsored a resolution to create a World Trade Efforts Commission to study and recommend a state role for the promotion of exports. The commission will make its final report in December. of this year and is now in the process of conducting hearings around the state to receive public input. In March of this year, the state conducted its first export trade mission in Toronto, Canada. 9 Maryland companies participated in this mission, and the results were encouraging, with the companies involved identifying about $1.7 million in potential new and expanded opportunities for their firms. And so we come to the present. I have described for you the steps my administration has taken in the past to position Maryland in export promotion. We have moved deliberately, but with commitment. The time has arrived for a total state commitment to international trade. Toward that end, I will present to the citizens of Maryland and make as part of my 1985 legislative package for consideration by the General Assembly a comprehensive state trade program. One of the essential ingredients will be an export development program housed in the Department of Economic and Community Development, and which will involve the promotion and financing of Maryland exports. Under this program, the state will develop and make available to Maryland firms the information and expertise necessary for them to enter, to compete, and to succeed in this field of immense potential. And I intend to see that the financing and funding of this program are started and maintained at an effective level. The specific details, of course, will await the final report of the World Trade Efforts Commission that I mentioned, which will play a vital role in fashioning this program. I will require that the thrust of the program be implemented in close conjunction with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Must work closely with them and the Export-Import Bank to ensure that Maryland firms have the opportunity to take full advantage of all available international trade programs. As a complement to the state's effort to attract foreign firms to invest in Maryland, the Export Assistance Program also has an ultimate goal designed for one main purpose: create jobs. I believe our commitment to the domestic and international business community to make Maryland and its products focal points in international trade relations will accomplish our goals. We've had that commitment in the past, we have it now, and we will have it in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, we thank you very much for your comprehensive and significant statement. The governor has agreed to graciously to answer questions until our finishing time at 10 minutes after 7.
Remains to be seen whether it be graciously or not.
I remind you that if you do have to leave early, now would be the best time. Otherwise, if you would leave with the governor at 7:10, that would be appreciated. Yes, sir.
I studied in Baltimore, France, and also worked a year in Hanover, Germany, in the French company, and enjoyed living in Europe very much. Then I came back here a few years ago and started working in Baltimore. And in Europe, I enjoyed walking around Paris a lot, in Hanover, at all hours of the night, and I thought I could do the same thing in Baltimore. However, about a couple of years ago, while I was walking in the street in downtown Baltimore on a Friday night, I was held up and shot in the head. And I think the difference between Baltimore and European cities is that in Europe they have a very strong handgun control legislation, which prevents a lot of people from shooting people on the streets late at night. Now, I worked for your legislation, which was, I think, also helped out by Paula Hollinger and Lieutenant Governor Curley about 2 years ago to strengthen their handgun control laws.
You are going to ask me a question.
I wanted to see if you're going to introduce more handgun control legislation next year?
We haven't made any decision on this yet. I'm very much for handgun control. I happen to think that the solution to it really is going to have to come at the national level. I just don't think it can be solved at the state level. I know Lieutenant Governor Kern has a history of being in favor of this kind of legislation. We will be discussing it, but we've not made any decisions whether to do anything further. It's not easy to get through.
Mr. Cole.
Dr. Bird, I have a comment rather than a question. I had lived in the 1980s made on condition in China with Dr. Hughes. And I just want to comment that all of you who have been there are good citizens of the state of Maryland who have been very proud of the way you and them conducted themselves and representing the citizens of the states. Skill, dexterity, very professional way. From a pure business point of view, I want to say that our institution, the First National Development, very fine correspondent banking relationship with the Bank of China, since that time has continued to grow and prosper. I want to compliment this administration for broadening out the state's economic and international horizon. Toward being the principal asset, I encourage you to keep up the good work.
Thank you for that question, Charlie. You wouldn't have been so proud of him if you saw me using those chopsticks.
I'm impressed by your speech and the kind of developments that you have instigated in your administration versus what we had before, and recognition of the changing global economy. I wonder if you could translate for us into just what kind of increase in job availabilities that really results to in Maryland.
Well, I gave you some figures that show that since 1980, the investment by foreign firms in Maryland has translated into 1,800 new jobs. All foreign firms in Maryland, and Brad gave the figure, which I think was 100 and some, obviously translated into many thousand new jobs. The plant that I attended the other day, the opening of the headquarters, is just one industry, but it's 200 jobs. It translates into a lot of jobs. And, obviously, the more exports we can have translate into jobs here too, and provide a market for the products that are made here. So, again, that is the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned. It's the jobs that are created. And this is an excellent way in the previous area of doing it.
Mr. Stern.
Governor, could you give us your position on two major federal trade issues? One, the domestic content bill, and the other, the steel quotas offered by the steel caucus?
First, as a basic philosophy, I favor free trade. I do believe, however, though, that it should be a two-way street. And I would support although I don't have a vote over there, I would support the proposal for the quotas on steel imports for the 5-year period, I think is what they're asking, to give our industry, steel industry, a chance to get back on its feet. I think that's a fair request. And on the domestic content bill, I think I'm not that familiar with it, but I would certainly, if I were one going to vote on this, I would look at what does Japan do, or what does Germany do insofar as protectionism, as far as restraints that they might have. Because I do believe it's a two-way street, and I do know that there are restraints that exist in those countries on American products or other foreign products going into those countries. And again, I say I'm for free trade, but I would gauge each one on its individual basis, but I'd certainly look at whether it was a two-way street or not before I decide how I was going to vote on something of that nature.
I'm with a local company in Baltimore County and have worked with the ECD in terms of their export development programs. We've seen some strengths and we've also seen some weaknesses, and I was wondering if you can get into any more specifics of what the Foreign Trade Committee is recommending at this point in terms of
No, I really can't because it isn't finally developed. The commission is working on it, and they, as I said, are having public hearings, and they are going to be working out the details, and I just can't go beyond what I've said today.
Do they have a date for when their final recommendation?
Well, they're supposed to report in December. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
What considerations are being given to the surrounding states in trying to build up the foreign trade of this entire area surrounding the Chesapeake Bay, particularly Virginia, Delaware, and Pennsylvania?
We really haven't been doing much of that. Every state's sort of been going on its own. I attended a conference recently in Virginia, in Richmond, the North-South Summit, they called it. Well, it was, that's what they called it. And some very intelligent, knowledgeable people, spoke at the panel. And that wasn't the subject matter, but it sort of came in, the regional issue. And it was interesting to note that there's not that much difference between the North and the South. Things sort of equal out. I mean, we've heard over the years about the industry moving from the North to the Sun Belt. That was true. But things started happening in the 70s in the South that turned that around a little bit. And so that we're all fairly equal in the marketplace insofar as advantages and disadvantages are concerned. But up until now, the efforts have really been state by state because you want to get it for your state. That's been basically what it has been. But that isn't to say that it couldn't be the kind of thing you're suggesting. Maybe with the kind of cooperation that we're seeing now on our Bay program, that we could use that as a model for trying to get some cooperation on a regional basis for export programs.
I'd like to ask, do these foreign firms, concerns who do business here, do they own their own property? I have a twofold question. Do they own the land that they're doing business on? And the second part of the question is, how much land can foreign countries own in Maryland or in the States, is actually a general question, before it becomes a point of diminishing returns, or does it become a point of diminishing returns?
Well, first, they may or they may not own the land. They lease the facilities, and a lot of them do buy the land, build their own facilities. I don't know quite how to answer your second question. There's no limit that I know of on how much land foreign firms may own in Maryland or any place else.
I realize there's no limit. Yes. I mean, should there be a limit, is my question.
Well, I personally don't think so. We Americans owned a lot of land around the world for a long time and still do without limits being imposed on us. And I just don't think that we should do that. No, I don't think there should be a limit. I don't think it's going to be that kind of a problem, if it is any problem.
You mentioned that there were 1,800 jobs created in the time that Maryland has been out actively pursuing reverse investment. The Department of Commerce states that there's between 30 and 40,000 jobs created for $1 billion of export. Right now, Maryland's in the $10 to $11 billion range as of '81. I'm wondering if you see your new policy going more towards export development rather towards reverse investment, where most of the resources have been at this point.
Well, the emphasis we're talking about now is on exports. The import of reverse investment's been pretty good here, I guess, Mr. Frank. And what we're talking about now is to put a greater emphasis on the exporting of goods in Maryland. I'm not familiar with those figures that you quoted from the Department of Commerce. I don't know what the significance of it is, but the figures I gave you of 1,800 jobs are just those foreign firms that have located here since 1980.
Governor, I'd like to know if you've included in your thinking and production the possibilities of banning
Latin America and Africa into the program?
Well, let me put it this way. We certainly haven't excluded those areas. There have been many delegations from Africa that come to my office in the past 3 or 4 years. I may have made one slip up. There was some sister state relationship between Maryland and a province or a state in Brazil many, many years ago. And it may still exist, but I don't think it's terribly active. No, there's no intent to exclude those areas. And we really haven't gotten to that, at least it hasn't gotten to my level yet, about what areas of the world you're talking about concentrating on. My own efforts have been in Europe and Asia, as of this point. I haven't been to the other areas.
Providing a service, having a service industry that provides services internationally. We use the BWI facility quite often, and the recent service that we've gotten to Europe, NATO in particular, has helped a great deal. Are you planning to try and push for direct service or one-stop service to the Far East?
Oh, there's a continuous effort at BWI in marketing that airport and trying to get as much overseas service as we can. It's very difficult now. Whether or not they're really pushing for a one-stop service to the Far East, I don't know at this point, but there's a continued effort to do this, and you can see where there's been some results shown as far as the European service is concerned recently. But I'm not exactly familiar with whether or not they're working on the area that you're talking about, but I'm sure they probably are because they're looking at everything. Wonderful airport.
Yes, I'm the president of a small business here in the state of Maryland. And you touched several times upon export assistance, which is an area that we feel and have felt for several years has needed some identity. I think within DECD, we've had difficulty finding, if there is such a group down in DECD, what support they can give small businesses in terms of their technical participation overseas or their travel or their expenses they incur. I would like to think, Governor, that in this planning, you mentioned the World Trade Efforts Committee on Export, that's a big word. Hopefully they will conclude there can be some definitive assistance to those people who need to export. As somebody said here, we employ about 20 or 30 people for every $1 million we export. And the bottom line, sir.
Well, that's what we're talking about doing, the kind of thing that you just mentioned here. Within the department, the information gathering that I've described, the technical assistance, expertise to Maryland businesses, sharing the information with them, and certainly small business will be as important a part of that as anything. And exactly one of the things we're trying to address with this emphasis that I've described today. I'm hoping we'll be able to help you and others in this area. But you're right on target with what's needed, and we hope we are with the solution.
Governor, I think you mentioned that there are 8 enterprises in Maryland, and I'm curious to know how they affect international trade. Can you explain it?
How they what?
How they affect international trade. Enterprise
I didn't get the word how they what? Help?
How they
affect. Okay. Well, I suppose they aren't as directly concerned as the free trade zones are, insofar as international trade is concerned. But the enterprise zones are established in an effort to attract industry with certain incentives to locate in those enterprise zones. And obviously this would apply to a foreign investment in this state, if they qualify to have an incentive to them as well as to domestic firms to locate and establish themselves in the enterprise zone. So it's not really directed at that, but it's sort of a byproduct.
Yes, ma'am.
Governor Hughes, what is the breakdown of white collar to blue collar and foreign investment in Maryland? I refer to the truncated film problem of Canada's industrial triangle. Will we become a lesser developed state?
Well, I can't give you the breakdown of white collar, blue collar. It's just something I don't happen to have in my head. I don't know why, but I just can't give it to you. I don't know what it is as far as it relates to foreign trade. So I can't answer your question.
Yes, sir.
Governor, what do you thought much about state financing, up to the state financing bank, in this plan next year, and also about tax credits for exports?
State financing bank.
Well, state financing facility.
Well, again, the details of all this haven't been worked out, but we have a lot of funding programs in DECD, as you probably know, not directed specifically at this kind of effort. And this group will be looking at things such as that to see whether or not we need some special financing program as a help in the exporting programs that we're going to be developing. Probably will be something. Now, tax incentives, I don't know. I'm not a great one for tax incentives, to be very frank with you. I think that for the most part, if you're in pretty good shape insofar as being competitive tax-wise, and you've got a lot of other things, industry is willing to pay its fair share of taxes as long as they're fair and equitable and competitive with other states. So that's just my own personal view about tax incentives.
Yes, sir.
Governor, first of all, I think you're to be applauded and praised for all of your initiatives up to this point.
You all want to applaud now? I afraid you might forget.
Really, and for your plans for the future and moving Maryland into the international trade arena. But I wonder, sir, if you could comment on the situation of a couple of years ago when the Department of Commerce gave the state of Maryland either a $100,000 or $150,000 grant. The state did nothing with it for a year, and so the Department of Commerce took the money away and subsequently gave it to another jurisdiction. Were you aware of that, sir? And if you were, what was the story on that?
Well, I'm not sure I know the whole story, but I'm aware of what you're talking about, and it was $150,000. And the time I became aware of it, it was too late. The deadline had gone by. It was inexcusable. I think one extension had been granted, and another one would not be, which I understand. I think it was inexcusable. And something like that isn't going to happen again. But we're trying to reestablish those relationships with the Department of Commerce. I think some of the money was spent, and what was remaining had to be returned. But it was just inexcusable.
Thanks.
And as governor, I guess I'm responsible, but I didn't know about it.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I was wondering whether in the efforts to increase export, counter trade has been developed, or it is intended to develop counter trade more than the present level.
Develop
Counter trade.
counter trade.
Where goods are exported and not paid for in monetary form, but in barter.
You gonna do that? Secretary of Economic Community Development says yes, that they're going to be exploring that. Very much so, he says. I'm glad you're here. It's getting like a press conference.
Would the governor be kind enough to introduce those members of his administration who are here and who may not be known to us visually
in the public?
Well, Secretary Frank DeFrancis, stand up, Frank, who's Secretary of the Department of Economic and Community Development. Secretary Pat Hughes, who's Secretary of Government House. Andrew Johnson, and you can see why we call him Johnny, who's my staff director. Secretary John Corbley, who is Secretary of the Department of Licensing and Regulation, which has all those little things like Banking Commissioner, Insurance Commissioner, Labor and Industry, Barber Board, Cosmetology Board, Racing Board, you name it, he's got it, and he's leaving. Annette Silverman, my secretary. Sylvia Ramsey, who's a program aide on the staff. I don't see any others. If they're here, I'll hear about it tomorrow.
Yes, sir. I would go with a local question from Maryland only. Do we have any long-range plans for new economy build-up in Allegheny and Garrett County, which are hurting at the moment?
Well, they are hurting at the moment, and we've made some efforts up there with training funds to retrain people at the community college. We're hoping to put in some sort of well, not some sort of an extension of the University of Maryland training ETV program for training people in engineering, so they learn new skills. We do have the Fairchild plant now, so we're trying to market that. It belongs to the state, and but it's a serious problem up there. The coal industry obviously has had a tremendous effect, particularly on Garrett County. There's an encouraging sign by what happened in Kelly Springfield recently. Management and labor did get together, and some concessions were made, and so they're hiring people back. And I've talked to the president of Goodyear, who owns Kelly Springfield, and I've talked to Al Dunn, and our hope is that they will stay there, and not only stay there, but that they will build a radial tire there. They make the bias tire at Cumberland now, but they're going to build a radial plant in the next few years. The Kelly Springfield organization, and we hope that they will build it there, and if they get this good record now with labor and management together and good production, that's a possibility. I don't know if Frank has anything to add to that. I guess some of your people have been making some special efforts out there, but it isn't easy. It isn't easy, and the long-range effort is not easy. You know, they had Celanese is closing, Kelly Springfield's cut back. They just lost a tremendous amount of manufacturing employment there, old plants. So it isn't easy. They even went to prison. Some went to prison, but not all of them. Some of them went to prison. As an economic development, I'd already made the decision, to put it in Somerset County, which also has a very high unemployment rate, and we refer to it not as a prison, as an employment center, because we're going to employ about 500 people down there.
Yes, sir.
Governor, what is your position on what I believe is proposed legislation to require industry to give notice to the state if they want to close down? How would it apply to current terms?
Well, we don't have that law in Maryland. At one point, I thought it might not be a bad idea if you had some reasonable notice, not 6 months, but at least some reasonable notice. But the more I pursued it, the more I'm not so sure it is a good idea. but we have not made any decision. We didn't put a building on it this year. I've read pros and cons with regard to that. It is a little disturbing, you know, when someone calls you and in the morning and says, we want to let you know that we're announcing this afternoon that we're going to close the plant next week, or we're going to close the plant tomorrow. And we do have we've developed a team to go into a plant when there is a closing that's been announced, to work with the employees there who will be laid off, to try to assist them in getting other jobs or getting into training programs so they can be retrained. We have a team to do that, and they get in very quickly. And it is helpful if you get some notice, a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, of the plant closing. It's helpful to get in there. It's helped the morale of employees. So someone's there to work with them. But we haven't made any decision on that.
How competitive is Maryland labor, both in cost and productivity, with other foreign labor?
Well, in cost with foreign labor. Oh. Well, I think everybody in the room knows the answer to that. Obviously, our labor costs are higher in this country than in, I suppose, most other countries of the world, particularly the more underdeveloped countries. And that's publicly known. And that's basically because we have the high standard of living, which is good. But that hasn't been a great problem insofar as foreign investment here in this country. You've heard the statistics you've heard today. It certainly hasn't been a problem in Maryland. But obviously it's higher, but it hasn't been a problem. But in this area we're talking about.
Governor, how many countries do we have representatives from Maryland working there to bring trade people?
Well, we have an economic and community development office in Brussels. We also have the Maryland Port office there too. And we have a Maryland Port office in London, or just outside of London. And we have an economic and community development representative in Tokyo. We also have a port office in Tokyo. And we have a port office in Hong Kong. So we have 2 economic development offices outside of that. Is that right, Frank? Yeah. The port offices help too. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping maybe we can get them a little more together. They have different responsibilities, but I'm hoping we can get them a little more together. But these trade missions have been very successful, and they include business people and local government people, not just state officials. And that's one of the things that makes them so successful. And the people we have in these foreign countries, in Japan and Brussels, obviously have a major role to play in that, plus their day-to-day roles.
Governor, can you compare the aggressiveness of Maryland as compared with Virginia, North Carolina, perhaps, Delaware, other states right in our own region in terms of outreach? Maybe not even internationally, but also within the United States, attracting other entities into our...
I can't compare it. There's a magazine called Inc. that rates states. And, sometimes I like it, and sometimes I don't. It depends upon where Maryland is. But they rate us very high regionally. Maybe in the middle, nationally, but I think we're first or second rated for our region in this economic development effort, or business climate, maybe that's the proper word. North Carolina and Virginia do a lot. North Carolina is known for doing a lot. But the interesting thing, in 1982, North Carolina had either the first or the second highest number of plant closings in the country. We were way down. They probably spend more money. They're a little bigger state. Virginia's a bigger state. But it's interesting. I call a lot of corporate executives when we have a line on them that they're going to locate somewhere, and they may have looked at Maryland and looked elsewhere, and DECD, Frank DeFrancis, if somebody lets me know who to call, and I call them. And I'm very, very gratified by the response we get. First, that our effort is very aggressive and very professional, but not high pressure. That it's factual and very professional. And we're getting the results. So I'm fairly well satisfied with some of the efforts that have been made. And if you'll talk to businesses that have located here, I haven't seen one yet that just wasn't terribly happy with Maryland, with the work, the job they're getting done, and obviously, you know, best place in the world to live. I mean, they got like that. But I haven't seen one yet that wasn't very, very satisfied with it. The AAI that's in Baltimore County, they were expanding. They could have gone to Denver, or I guess it was Oakland, or Orlando. They decided to expand here because they like doing business here. So I think we're very competitive with those states.
To what extent, Governor, the fact that we have a very, very outstanding cultural, academic, and other similar enriching environment has contributed to the success that you have talked about in locating industries here?
Well, it's contributed a lot.